This is CJ Baker, and every day I've been listening to a different randomly generated album that appears in the book 1001 Albums You Must Hear Before You Die. And I just finished my 12th week. So, just like I did with my previous weeks, this is my weekly recap. So, I'm going to post my previously posted reviews that were posted as shorts, but because they were edited down, some of the reviews are going to have additional bonus content. Afterwards, I'll give my observations, my updated rankings, and will answer the question, did the albums I listened to this week belong in the book? So if you want me to keep making these videos, please like and subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss further videos. So get right into it. Please enjoy. Today's randomly generated album is the 1969 self-titled debut by the Stooges. So the Stooges were an important proto-punk band. And of course, there were other proto-punk bands. And even in 1969, their fellow Michigan band, the MC5s, also released a debut album. But a lot of the proto-punk that came before the Stooges still sound like it came from the 60s. So it's basically 60s garage rock based, where the Stooges sounded way ahead of their time. And I think it's interesting to note the dichotomy of what was going on when this album was released. So yes, you had Woodstock and the peace and love ideals of the hippie movement haven't completely died off yet, but you also had the Vietnam War, widespread protest, and there was even a sense of disillusionment over the socio-political climate, and even a sense of disillusionment that individuals were starting to realize that some of those ideals weren't really living up to the expectations, like all that free love and rampant drug use. There was also a dark side to that as well. So the Stooges and Iggy Pop were well articulating a lot of the feelings of disillusionment and alienation. So they're kind of expressing kind of that other side to the 60s. So we'll get right into the album. So it opens with 1969, which is kind of gets back to what I just mentioned there. That song 1969, it's not a flower pop song. It's basically almost like a mission statement that the band wants to put the final nail in the coffin of those 60 ideals. And then you also got songs like I Want to Be Your Dog, absolute banger, very gritty tune, no fun. That also well expresses the alienation of the time. And then the song like Not Right. It does have the punky edginess of the rest of the album, but it also shows a slightly different side because Iggy Pop's writing about like a woman that the two of them had mutual attraction to each other, but then kind of realized that there was emotional disconnect and they were just not compatible or right for each other. So there's some kind of like interested thoughts about human relationship there that actually shows some kind of surprising insightfulness. But yeah, overall, really strong album, really strong debut. I probably even prefer the next two albums by the Stooges. But yeah, like I said, really strong, foundational, proto-punk album. I give it 4.5 stars. Today's randomly generated album is Diamond Life by Sade, released in 1984. So this is the debut album by the UK band. And I don't think I'm alone here. There was actually a time where I always thought Sade was a solo artist, but it is technically a band. It just happens that Sade is also the lead singer, and her real name is Sade Adu. But the band actually has had the same lineup basically for their entire career, with the exception on the first couple of albums. They had a drummer, which they don't have a drummer now. But yeah, we'll get into the album. It opens really strong with Smooth Operator. So yeah, absolute classic song. Smooth Operator. Smooth operator. Yeah, I know that's terrible, but I enjoy singing badly to it. And of course, singing badly is the only way I know how to sing. It actually has really strong bookends. Like it closes strong with a gorgeous cover of Why Can't We Live Together? And there's a number of other highlights on the album. Like the second song on the album's another classic you'll love is King. Other highlights, When Am I Gonna Make a Living, which is also a really strong, socially conscious song. Then there's Cherry Pie, which Warren ended up covering a few years after. I'm actually joking. It's totally different cherry pie, but I think someone, if they haven't done it yet, should mash up Sade's cherry pie with Warren's cherry pie. I think that would be something I would definitely get a kick out of. Then I also enjoy the song Sally, which is a really strong, deep cut on the album, and I enjoy the lyrical narrative of that too. So the album, just like the operator, is very smooth when it comes to both jazz and soul music, which this album has elements of both. I'm not always a fan of smooth. I enjoy my jazz and soul music with a bit more grit. But in the case of this album, I don't have a problem with it. I think it's because of Sade's vocals. There's something seductive and compelling. And I do think the music suits the vocals and the lyrics. So it's just something about the whole package that just comes together, which draws me in and I enjoy listening to it. So yeah, overall, excellent album. I give it 4.5 stars. Today's randomly generated album is American 4, The Man Comes Around by Johnny Cash, released in 2002. So this was the fourth album as part of the American recording series that Johnny Cash did with Rick Rubin, which helped revitalize his career. As far as I'm concerned, those American recording albums are some of the best work Johnny Cash has ever done. So I already mentioned previously that I'm a huge Johnny Cash fan, and it's something that kind of happened by accident. I just stumbled upon a free concert he was giving back in '94 at the C&E Bandstand, and then I immediately became a fan. And this was around the time of the American recordings. But we'll get right into this album. It is mostly covers, but there's 3 original songs, including the opening track, which is one of the highlights. The Man Comes Around, which is based on the book of Revelation, and it makes reference to the 4 horsemen. And just because I like to talk about bookends, I'll mention that now. It also closes strong with his cover of We'll Meet Again, which I think is considered a little bit of like a country standard, but it was just an appropriate way to close the album. So one of the other originals is Give My Love to Rose, which he originally recorded in 1957. And he's re-recorded it on a few different occasions. And he also performed it as part of the Live at Folsom Prison album. So I'm not always a big fan when artists re-record songs because most of the time it's kind of unnecessary. But this is a gorgeous rendition of it. And it does take on, maybe not really a different context, but it's a slightly different version when he's performing it towards the end of his life. And his voice is a bit more aged and frail. So the song does take on a bit more vulnerability in that context. That's something I would say. I think part of the reason why the American recording albums and this album in particular are so powerful is because of Cash's voice. Like his voice was always something that was distinctly his own, but when he was younger, the voice was a bit more booming. But because the voice was a little bit more weaker and aged, it was powerful in a slightly different way. Like it was basically someone that's basically has gone through stuff in his life and you could hear it in his vocals. So yeah, definitely a gorgeous version of that song. And the other original was Tear Stained Letter, which was a solid tune as well. So we'll get into the covers. And of course, the one that would immediately stand out and definitely a highlight of the album and one of the best cover songs of all time was his cover of Nine Inch Nails' Hurt. And I already talked about this when I did my review of Nine Inch Nails' Downward Spiral. The Nine Inch Nails version resonated with me in my teens. The Johnny Cash version also resonated with me for different reasons. So in the case of Trent Reznor, he was basically talking about literally hurting himself, which as a teen, I never got to the point where I got into self-mutilation or anything like that, but because I struggled with anger and depression issues to a certain extent, I vicariously lived through Trent Reznor's lyrics, but as a relatively well-adjusted adult, I connected to Johnny Cash's version in a different way. And the context of Johnny Cash's version was just basically looking back on his life with regrets, and he kind of hurt himself by looking back on his past transgressions. And it was also a powerful music video and connection with Johnny Cash's version. But there was a number of other powerful songs on the album. Like, for example, when I first listened to the album, when I bought it on CD, one of the songs that immediately I took notice of was I Hung My Head, which was a cover of a Sting tune. And when I first heard Sting's version, I did not like Sting's version. The musical arrangement was lame. I don't think Sting's a bad vocalist. It just did not suit the song's subject matter. Sting succeeded in writing a really good Johnny Cash song, but he also wrote a terrible Sting song. You got some other highlights like Personal Jesus by Depeche Mode. And it's one of those songs that on the surface, you'd be like, okay, Johnny Cash covering Depeche Mode. And it's the same with Johnny Cash covering Nine Inch Nails. And in the case of both of those songs, that was probably the Rick Rubin connection. Like on his own, Johnny Cash probably wouldn't have thought of covering Nine Inch Nails or Depeche Mode. And it's also like some of the other songs that Johnny Cash covered. Like one of my favorite songs that Johnny Cash covered appeared on the second American recording album, Unchained. He covered Rusty Cage by Soundgarden. And once again, on the surface, Johnny Cash covering Soundgarden does not make sense. And you think Johnny Cash covering Nine Inch Nails, covering Depeche Mode, covering Soundgarden, you think potentially it could come across as like hokey and gimmicky, kind of like Pat Boone doing a heavy metal album, which was a very real thing that happened. But it works because if you actually take time to read the lyrics are actually lyrics that you could picture Johnny Cash singing. And Rick Rubin had the hindsight to realize that. And to Johnny Cash's credit, he was open-minded enough to give it a go. So he understood the assignment and he was able to connect with those lyrics. And really, I love the entire album. It's also the final album that Johnny Cash recorded before he died. So it's definitely a fitting farewell album. Absolute masterpiece. Easy 5 stars. Today's randomly generated album is The Dandy Warhols Come Down by the Dandy Warhols. So this is the sophomore album by the Portland band. Dandy Warhols are a band that I never thoroughly got into, but they do have some songs I don't mind, including this album. Like this was the first album that I've listened to by them, but they did have a couple songs on the album I was familiar with. They could add the song Not If You Were the Last Junkie on Earth and Every Day Should Be a Holiday. Both those tunes are solid tunes. We'll get into the rest of the album and we'll start by discussing the bookends. So open with the song Be In. I don't mind the song because there's elements of it that I like. It has a nice dreamy quality to it, but the song does meander a bit. It's about 7 minutes long and it gets a little bit repetitive. So it'd be a really good song if you cut it in half. Speaking of too long, the closing track, the Creep Out, is like 9 minutes long. It gets really repetitive. The song is just really irritating. It's by far my least favorite song on the album. Unfortunately, the album closes on a bad note, so I don't like that. But I mentioned the length, and That'd be part of my criticism for the entire album. It's over an hour long, which admittedly was an issue with the CD era. There's a few songs like that are either too long or they feel like they're too long. And some of that has to do with the fact that some of the songs have shoegazy elements. And I don't mind shoegaze music, but sometimes my issue with shoegaze is that it's guilty of excessive meandering. Like sometimes I'll just play the same note repetitively for like 2 minutes straight. And it gets a little bit annoying. It's like, get to the destination already. Why can't you just land the plane? So yeah, so that's a bit of an issue of a few of the songs on the album. But I don't want to be a total negative Nancy, so now we'll be a positive Pete. So they're all songs I like on it. I already mentioned two of the songs. I also like Minnesota, which is a bit of a quirky tune where they even sing for a bit of a Minnesota accent, get a bit of a kick out of that. I also really like the song Cool is Kim Deal, kind of catchy and quirky. We enjoy that song as well. Other than the closing track, there's not much that I hate. There's a few songs that are just there. There's a total of 14 tracks. It's over an hour. Maybe if they lose 4 or 5 of those tracks, reduce the length, it would be a stronger album. I don't hate the album. It was decent. I'll give it 3.5 stars. Today's randomly generated album is Live at the Regal by B.B. King, released in 1965. I'm not necessarily a blues aficionado. I like the blues and I have a lot of respect for the blues. And the reality is the majority of music that I listen to owes a debt to the blues. And I also like B.B. King, and he has a lot of songs I like. The Thrill Is Gone, absolute banger, possibly my favorite blues song of all time. The Thrill Is Gone is not on this album, but this is a widely regarded album. It is considered an influential, important blues album. And we'll get right into the album. So we'll begin by saying that his voice is in fine form. And I love his voice. There's a lot of grit to it. And on the album, he does show good versatility. Like there's times where he also breaks into a mild falsetto, which I really dig as well. And we'll get into a couple of the specific songs, like Sweet Little Angel, definite I like. There's some tasty guitar licks. I also like how Sweet Little Angel segues to the next track, It's My Own Fault. And that's another thing I'll say about the album. I'm really into the crowd interaction. And also the crowd's very lively, which adds to the experience. So it makes the album a bit more immersive. It makes it easier to kind of visualize like you're there in the audience. Another highlight is how blue can you get? And once again, you got the fantastic guitar playing. And on the entire album, not only do you have B.B. King's playing, but the entire band is solid. But also with that song, I get a kick out of the lyrics as well. The lyrics are pretty humorous. The album also closes on a strong note, Help the Poor. So I like the social consciousness of that song. And I also like how it's a bit of a thematic shift. A lot of the songs are some variations of I got the blues, here's why I got the blues. I don't want to be too nitpicky on that because that's why they call it the blues. But it is nice to at least have some variety. So yeah, with that song, it definitely closes on a strong note. And I also like the fact that the album's only 35 minutes. It just breezes by and it's very easy to listen to. So yeah, excellent album, 4.5 stars. If you're someone that's a bit of a blues novice, I think this is a good introductory album. If you're not really familiar with B.B. King, it's a really solid introduction to his work as well. Today's randomly generated album is The Poet by Bobby Womack, released in 1981. So I'm not overly familiar with Bobby Womack, but he does have some songs I like the song Across 110th Street is an absolute banger, but that song's not on this album. The most well-known song on this album, and the only one I knew of ahead of time, is If You Think You're Lonely Now, which I don't hate, and it's the best song on the album. Getting into the rest of the album, Bobby Womack, he sings well. He has a really good voice. He's also a good guitarist, and he used to be the guitarist for Sam Cooke, but unfortunately, he doesn't really showcase this ability on this album. the guitars kind of take a little bit of the back seat, where I would prefer if he was able to use that part of his repertoire a bit more. Musically, there's a little bit of a light funk feel. I would have preferred if they leaned into the funk a bit more. The funk was a little bit watered down. Also, the overall sound, it was a bit too smooth for my personal taste. This sounded very dated, very 80s, and it was just like ultra cheesy. And then my other issue with the album was some of the lyrics at times were really cringe. And the most egregious example of that is Secrets, where Bobby Womack even compares a woman to KFC and basically talks about how she's finger licking good. And even beyond that, there's some other lines in that song that just like, yeah, I mean, if they were meant to be funny, I can kind of see the humor to it, but I don't think it was meant to be funny. It was actually kind of being serious. So yeah, but yeah, the entire album was just mostly mad to me. And even though overall length, it wasn't a long album, it was only 39 minutes long, but at times it was kind of a slog to get through. So yeah, I just didn't connect with the album. It wasn't my thing. So yeah, 2.5 stars. Today's randomly generated album is A Seat at the Table by Solange, released in 2016. So Solange does have an older sister named Beyonce. You may have heard of her. And unfortunately, because of that, she's quite often has been overshadowed by her more famous sister. But this album in particular did receive a fair bit of attention. It was critically well received. It made a number of year-end best-of lists. But yeah, we'll get into the album. So the album was a mix of the personal and the political, and it touched upon issues of blackness and specifically issues in connection with being a black woman. Like, for example, one of the songs on the album was Don't Touch My Hair, which basically dealt with black woman hair from a socio-political perspective and even discuss racial undertones in connection with that as well. So yeah, like obviously I'm not a black woman, so I can't fully relate to a lot of what's being discussed on this album, especially in a song like Don't Touch My Hair. Like obviously me losing my hair and going bald doesn't have any socio-political ramifications. And even if people wanted to rub my head, I mean, it would definitely be annoying. I wouldn't like it, but there wouldn't be any racial undertones connection to that. But yeah, what I do appreciate about the album is I do like to be exposed to different perspectives. So yeah, so this album makes me aware of things that I may not have had much awareness of otherwise. And I think we can even connect that to the title of the album, A Seat at the Table. So the whole idea of having a seat at the table, it's basically symbolic of being allowed to have a voice in the conversation and having your voice heard. And in connection with that, especially with this album, Solange makes an important contribution to that conversation. But we'll get to the rest of the album. So it opens really strong, like with the first two tracks, Rise and Weary. So Rise is under 2 minutes long and it's fairly short, but it has some galvanizing lyrics that kind of set the tone for the album. And mood-wise, it segues nicely to Weary, which is a very beautiful, pretty song. And then we got our first interlude after that. And there's a number of interludes throughout the album. Solange effectively uses these interludes to give context to the songs, and the interludes even add thematic cohesiveness to the album. The next song is Grains in the Sky, which is probably the most well-known song on the album. And it's my favorite track on the album. It's a very powerful song. And the cranes in the sky are actually a reference to construction cranes. And they're used as a symbolism of heavy emotional burdens. So yeah, lyrically, it really makes a powerful statement of the things that might burden us emotionally and just kind of the need to find ways to try to unload that burden. So yeah, those three songs I mentioned are the best three songs on the album. And I would describe the album as top heavy, and the last half of the album does start to lag a bit. But overall, it's a really strong album. I give it 4 stars. This concludes our weekly recap. And overall, it's been a pretty strong week. I had one new 5-star album, 3 4.5-star albums, a 4-star album, 3.5-star album, and only one album below 3 stars. But we'll now check out our updated rankings. So just before we scroll through these, I just want to make one note because I know there's people that are gonna watch this because I'm gonna be posting this as a clip. So they may watch this portion, but haven't watched the rest of the videos, and maybe they haven't been keeping up with all the reviews I've been doing. So just to mention it again. Every day I listen to a different randomly generated album that appears in the book, 1001 Albums You Must Hear Before You Die. So the list that I'm scrolling through now is my ranking of each album from best to worst based on the randomly generated albums that I listen to. So sometimes people ask me, okay, why does a certain album not appear on this list? I mean, it's simply for two reasons. So one, the album might appear in the book, 1001 Albums You Must Hear Before You Die, but the randomly generator has not selected it yet. So when the generator selects it, I'll listen to it and I'll review it. And then the second reason is it might not appear in the book. And if that's the case, then the random generator's never going to select it. Okay, we'll review the updated rankings. So as we mentioned, we got a new 5-star album, Johnny Cash, which is now my third rank album. Scroll down, we got some new 4.5-star albums. So we got the Stooges, which is now number 18. Scroll down some more. Yeah, so we got Sade, Diamond Life in the 25th spot. Then BB King was my other 4.5-star album, which is a 31. We got the new 4-star album, Solange, which is at 37. We'll scroll down a bit more. We do got a new 3.5-star album, Dandy Warhols, 59. We'll now scroll down towards the bottom. So we got the one album below 3 stars, A Poet by Bobby Womack. And then right at the very bottom, Scritti Politti. Still absolutely hate that album. So those were my updated rankings. So what did you think of those rankings? You can let me know in the comments. So we're now gonna ask the question that I ask every week. Do the albums I listened to this week belong in the book, 1001 Albums You Must Hear Before You Die? I think for the most part, don't have any issues. Like obviously my 5-star album and the 3 4.5-star albums and the 4-star album, no dispute there. There's a couple albums I might dispute a bit. So the one album, Dandy Warhols, I didn't mind the album, but the main question, like when we get into 1001 albums you must hear, obviously that's hyperbole because you could not listen to any of these albums and live a perfectly happy life unless you're just a miserable SOB. But really the question is, are these important, influential albums? In the case with the Dandy Warhols, like musically, they do some interesting things that I don't mind, but I'm not sure how influential or important they are. So to me, that's a little bit of a questionable pick. But they're all an American band, so I can't even accuse the UK bias on that one. And then the other album I may question is Bobby Womack. And obviously I did not like the album, like I only gave it 2.5 stars. But there's albums I absolutely hate that I think probably deserve to be in the book because I need to acknowledge that they were important and influential. But I'm not sure about this album. I do think Bobby Womack is an important artist. He also made some important musical contributions outside of just his solo career as well. So yeah, I mean, I haven't done a deep dive into Bobby Womack. I do view him more as a singles artist than an albums artist, but I could be wrong in that assessment. If I did more research and did a deeper dive, that assessment may change. As far as this particular album, I'm not sure if this is particularly considered influential or important, but once again, I could be wrong in my assessment. And if you disagree with anything I just said, feel free to let me know in the comments. And if you want me to keep making this content, please like and subscribe. And also hit that notification button so you don't miss any future videos. Also, feel free to check out my website, Ongoing History of ProtestSongs.com. Thanks for watching, and please stay safe.